Hi, I'm Scott Morris, and this is another one of my Classical Guitar Complete videos. So these are the videos based on the concepts in my books, Classical Guitar Complete Volume 1 and Volume 2. Today what I'm going to do is, there's going to be a little bit of repeating material from a four-part thing that I did a few months ago. But this is going to be a sort of condensed warm-up video. So this is going to be a warm-up for those times when you don't have an hour or two to warm up in a perfect way. So occasionally you will find yourself in a situation where you have to play really soon, and for whatever reason you just didn't have all day to play guitar. So what I'm going to just talk about here in a moment are a couple things that I like to do if I have to really condense my warm-up. Ideally I spend more time on it than this for sure. And I also think there's a difference between warming up by using arpeggios or scales or slurs and practicing those things in a serious way. So I just want to make that distinction right off the top here. But the first thing I like to do before I warm up is remind myself, especially if there's a time crunch. There have been times when I'll get to a venue for whatever reason. It's happened where I would only have just a few minutes before I actually had to go on stage and play. And what can you do at that time? The worst thing to do in the world is to just start playing through your pieces and hope for the best. That usually makes things much worse. So you want to calm down and remind yourself why you're warming up. You want to warm up to relax. You're relaxing into the guitar, and there are a few things you can do very slowly in the beginning to start to do that, and they're the most simple things you can possibly think of. Just start playing individual strings. Like a really slow arpeggio, like an IMA. And what I'm focusing on here is total relaxation, letting go of any tension in the finger after. So you're teaching your hand how to relax. Resist the urge to play really fast at this point. So just some very simple, you can do single string. I like to do free strokes at this point. Kind of test the waters, do some rest strokes as well. But you're just getting a basic feel, so I'm not really practicing anything other than the basic stroke and relaxation. So free stroke, rest stroke. Then, what I like to do is just do a few arpeggios. Just pick a few, and this can be tailored to your individual needs. For me, like an IMA arpeggio, my hand does that really naturally, and I don't require a lot of warming up to be able to do that. But there are certain things that my personal hand has trouble with. For instance, AMI is much more difficult for me, for whatever reason, than IMA. So if I'm really in a crunch for warming up here, I'm going to focus more on that. So, if you were to, say, go to my book, Classical Guitar Complete Volume 1, page 65, Giuliani, Opus 1, number 88, you've got this little guy here. Changes. I usually don't even use the chords, I just play open strings. And again, same thing as before, I'm just focusing on the relaxations between the fingers. It's just a little bit more complicated now because you have another finger playing sooner. Or, IMA. I do these first. Then what you want to do is one where you have a little turnaround in the hand. So sometimes I find it helpful if I'm really tight to just put a little pause, remind myself to relax, and then as you start to warm up a little bit more, then that little pause can go away. And do these as slow as you need to do them. But don't forget, if you have to play in a few minutes, you're going to need your left hand as well. The thing I like to do with my left hand, we've got a choice here. It's either going to be slurs or it'll be contrary motion. And again, it kind of depends on how I feel right at that moment. But slurs are a good way to go. Right, practice descending. As well, you can do. You can see those in chapter 6 in my book. There are a lot of other great warm-ups for that as well. Actually, that was from the Scott Tennant warm-up from Pumping Nylon. I've got a similar one in chapter 6 in my book. Just don't forget to do all the fingers. So that was 1 and 2. We're going to do 1 and 3, 1, 4, 2, 4, 1, 4, 2, 3. And again, if you're really at a loss for time, you might want to focus on the ones that are harder. So maybe not so much 1 and 2, but maybe more 2, 3, 3, 4. And don't rush. Again, it has to do with just being slow and deliberate about that. The contrary motion exercises, I love these. You're warming up, so you don't have to be in tune. Something like this, you can break them up. All sorts of little variations. I recommend that you do that, up here, at least in 5th position. Some people start down here, and I don't know, unless you have a really big hand, that's not a great place to warm up because the frets are so much bigger down here. So I definitely recommend warming up with those, higher up on the fretboard. But these are good because, they teach your left hand how to do all sorts of things you need to do when you're playing a piece of music. So, preparing the fingers, like when 1 and 3 are down here, you're preparing 2 and 4, and then moving when they're relaxed. So again, don't forget, you have to relax that finger before you move it, and something like that is really great for getting into that sort of thing. The last thing I like to do, I don't warm up with scales first, because I find if I warm up with scales, it can be pretty discouraging if my hands are really cold or really stiff or whatever it was. Because that requires the most synchronization of any of the techniques you're going to be practicing. So for that reason, I always keep scales for last, and I don't do anything fancy, with it. I just do some little chromatic like scales. You can do add shifts. Whatever scales you like to play. And I definitely recommend trying a couple different combinations here. So I don't just do IM, but I do IA, I do MA, and I like to do an AMI, as well. So maybe just simple chromatic scales, or pick like Segovia, 2 octave, something like that. And again, I just sort of test out the waters here if I'm in a real pinch for time, and see like what's coming naturally. So if my arpeggios are really happening, because everybody who plays guitar knows there are those days when certain techniques are just on, and you don't need to hang out on that for too long. Work on the things that you need to work on. And again, I have to say, this does not take the place of practicing these techniques. Also, it's not ideal, to have such a short amount of time to warm up. You could easily take what I've done here and stretch this out over, half an hour or an hour. I usually like to warm up for, at least 45 minutes or an hour, if that's, possible. And if you really need to work on your arpeggios or your scales, you need to set in your practice time, which is not the same as your warm-up time, to do that. So you need to spend the time and do your due diligence on each of these techniques. And as I've said in other videos, make sure you practice the things that you're not good at. You certainly don't want to ignore the things that you are good at, because someday you may not be so good at them if you don't practice them. But a lot of people, if you've got a great tremolo, they just play tremolo all the time. It makes them feel real good, but they don't get that much better as a guitar player. So practice the stuff that you have trouble with. Now, just to really kind of round this out here, there are a couple things that I also definitely recommend. It feels really good to love warming up with little strumming. Just do each of the fingers. That's a really great warm up. Pinky too. I wouldn't necessarily just jump right into playing lots of fancy Rascados if you don't do that a lot. At least for me, if I sit down and start really going for it with that, I can actually fatigue my hand, and that's the thing you don't want to do before you're about to go play. Little strums. I mentioned tremolo. Tremolo is a great thing. You can do single string tremolo. There are all sorts of other little exercises out there, including in my book. So hopefully this was helpful for you. And again, if you want to see longer, more detailed explanations for things like planting with arpeggios, or finger preparation, or all the different things that that I talked about here, but with longer, hopefully more clear explanations, feel free to check out the 4-part series I did on warming up. So until next time, happy practicing.